Professor of Sports Psychology, and we are going to be looking at how to do a literature review. And what we're going to be doing is going through the practical parts of it, how it works, how you do it in our software, what are the key issues, key challenges, how to do it. I've done a few of these before, and hopefully it's not that difficult. And some of the tricks, thoughts about how to not get yourself overwhelmed by it and how to do it so that it's quite easy to do. So brace yourself in and off we go. So what we do is we fire up Google, nice and simple Google, which you're all used to knowing and using and love. And in Google, what we do is we put the search terms of University of Wolverhampton and Sports Discus, and we hit return, push. And that beautifully brings us up to the login page of the university. We put our password in, and then we're straight into the Google search. And then within that, we look at the databases that are going to be searched. And here is what we're going to be doing, thinking about our key terms. And that's about what your research project's on about. But what will happen is that once you put those terms in and press fire, it will then scroll through and search every single time it can find one of those terms and can produce hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of searches. And so what you try to do is get those bit absolutely right. You don't have the wrong words. So you have a think about it. And that sounds like we've got to spend a lot of time pondering. It's not as hard as that. What you do is you put some words in, see what comes out, and you'll see a load of articles. And what I always do, is have a look at those articles and have a think about whether they've got the right terms. Often is I'll find an article that looks really close to what I want to be doing, and have a look at that, and you can click to see the abstract, and beautifully in the abstract are the key words that the authors put, and the key words will help are what has been helped to find that, and then you can just make a note of those, or you use them, because that will then drive articles close to that one of area of interest. So you're using the literature review to help shape your study and your research as much as possible. And you can't be expected to know exactly what you're going to do right at the start. Of course you can't. No one does. And what happens is, as we read, our ideas revise, and that's absolutely fine. So it's kind of, people ask me if I kind of change my research a little bit as it's going on. Well, it's normal to do that. It's really normal to do that. And as you're reading, our ideas develop, and becomes clear of what you want to find. So in the early stages, you use the search terms in order to help you shape your ideas, and that is a really good way of doing it. The key thing, I think it's quite nice if you are struggling with using the library services. There's a help button. If you look to the top right, there is can you chat with the librarian? So you should try and chat with them. I know that they are absolute whizzes with this sorts of stuff. They get into the database, they're used to doing it. They've done their degree in being a librarian, and they love it when someone asks them specific questions. So what I would do is, where possible, is when they have courses on how to use things like databases, go on them. Absolutely go on them. Upgrade your computer skills at every possibility. Any software package, learn it where you think, because it's useful, because you'll be in a job somewhere where you have to do a literature review, not to write a literature review, but to know about how the literature informs the practical area which you're going to be looking at. And this helps. Knowing this stuff really does help. So getting knowledge of how to use the computer systems is really important. And in essence, don't be afraid to use the button. Don't be afraid to hit the button. So, in order to illustrate one, I bunged in some words. I put emotion, because I love studying emotions, obviously. I put mental health, because that's a key area of research, and it's It will cross-link to lots of other areas, and I'll put in sport because I want to restrict the research down so it doesn't pick up all sorts of areas of therapy and so on. Those databases pretty much go across lots of different areas of application, and therefore you'll get a lot of studies that you won't want. Again, as I said before, you need to tinker around with this, think about this very carefully. It's your project. You need to think about what are the keywords, and going around looking at that previous research, previous literature reviews, and what were the keywords. It's a really helpful strategy in which to follow. But you think about them, pick them, you stick them in, and that really does work. And then you got a load of literature which you can look at. You can see the titles. Do they look interesting? Do they not look interesting? Are they in journals? And so on. So you look at them, and then you can see in that one quite beautifully that the access to the full article is there in the little red squared icon below it, which you click open, and that opens up the article for you to read in full. And that's really quite useful to know, because then you can start reading the reading literature. Some people like to download those to their local computer. I don't do that because that's what this system's for. It's already got a copy, so when you want to read it, you just go back and find it again and open it up and read it that way. I find that's an easier way of finding the file than any a method of trying to store articles I have. You have to think of names and so on. It becomes more problematic, and you can always find them around there. And also, what I think is quite useful is that you can save it and send it to yourself and send it, which will give you the reference in the right format, and you can pick that in the right format. So that also becomes quite useful. But I tend to just keep going back to the databases to reread stuff. For me, I will send myself a copy, but I will I'll just keep going back to the literature, partly because it always updates itself as well, and you get new articles coming at you, which does help. Get your record is you save and send. I send it by email, stick my email in, and I put the format for the references, which is a choice. So that box below is one that you can alter, and you put it in a format which is likely the one that's going to be used. And there's a list of them, so you look at the list and you pick the one that is the one that you're going to use in your dissertation. So all of that trouble you have of putting references in the right format, which you should be having trouble with because references should be in the right format, is made easier by how you save it. I don't use databases such as EndNote and RefWorks, which sometimes get advocated, partly because I see Sports Discus, as I said, as my database, and I go and fish it back from there each time, and I find that's fine. So there's some of the mechanics. What we have to do is then decide on how to put the literature review together. And that is the trick here, is to not overly complicate matters. What you've got to do is you've got to think very carefully about the research question you want to be looking at, and so you need to remind yourself of that. And once that's clear, that helps you then set out how you do the literature review, because then you want to go, well, I need to cover all of the research in that area. And here's one of the big words that you need to get. That big, it's quite big. It's quite a big word. That you need to get in your head is you need to up front talk about the delimitations. You delimit your research. You delimit it. You set limitations on it. What you're going to do is put around the literature a fence. It says, I'm only going to look at the research in that area. So one delimitation is you might be looking at research in only competitive sport, and therefore all of the research that might be on the topic of interest but done in exercise is outside of the scope of your area of research. You might say you're going to look at research only in football, one sport, and therefore all research outside of that isn't isn't going to be included. But there's a risk in that you delimit it so much that it doesn't cover much. It does give it focus, but in the reasons for delimiting is really important. I am delimiting this for these reasons, and one of them isn't, or one of them is that one is that you want it to be a focused literature review, but what you can't say is that it's too much work. We've delimited it to something really small because we didn't want to spend too much, and you can't say that. You have to delimit it by solid reasons to how that answers the question you're going to be looking at. So think carefully about the delimitations of that. And you think, oh, I never see the word delimitations. However, go through a journal article, and we'll get one of those up once I've rabbited on for a bit longer, and we'll look at how that is put together, because journal articles have this process going through them where the authors delimit to certain areas of focus and how they construct an argument that makes a case for doing their research. So delimitations is really important. Delimitations. I'll put that as a heading for you. So what a literature review does is build the case for the research you're going to be studying as part of your work. Is building the case. You're constructing an argument. Your literature review should end by saying a summary. In summary, the previous research has found this, and new research is needed to find whatever the new research is you're planning on going to do. That is really important, that you have that thought in your head. How does the previous research make a case for doing any new research? It might be that your research is to replicate another study. That is a good thing to do. There's a replication crisis going on in science, and that means that one study doesn't find what a previous study found. And whilst that doesn't seem overly original to try and find the same results, it is really useful if you can do that. And if you're a practitioner and you want to give somebody some advice, you want the results to be useful. If a finding has been repeatedly found at the same strength, this improved performance by 10% and did so in 20 studies, then you could say, well, if we do this, it's likely to improve your performance by the same percentage. If you've only got one study, you're looking then really closely at the rigour that was put together in that study. Is this a really reliable result? Is it? Or could it be? Could it be that a few people tried a bit harder in their study? A few of the participants were mates of the researcher. Could it have been that? And they got it to work in the way that they wanted it to? You need to work that out. But you could make a case for doing a repetition, and that's absolutely fine. But you could say we need to do it in this, it's been done in this sport, and now we need to do it in this sport. It's done in this age group, and now it needs to be done in this age group. But in doing so, you want to say, why would the relationship between how much training you do and how fit you get be different in elderly people than younger people? Why is there a difference in that? And you then look at the literature on age-related differences to make that case. Again, in your delimitations, if we're going to look at a certain group, you will have to do some work to understand the differences for how you then drive that down to that group. But that's all good. That's all because it makes a case for what you're going to be doing. The reader eventually gets your work and goes, person knows what he's doing, talking about. They're making a very good case for why we need this research. And in the end, if the reader goes, yes, there's a very clear one in here, there's very, very clear, then they are persuaded, they're convinced. The literature has been persuasive. And persuasive is a good word to think about as you write your literature. So the literature review is, in effect, big essay. It's not one continuous piece of writing, though. It's not just start at the top, no section headings at all. Break it down to section headings. You have an introduction. The introduction will say to the reader, it will say, tell the person what's coming. Yeah, tell them what's coming. This is what was coming. This is what was coming. This is why we're doing it. Again, persuasive, and it's why it will be revised an awful lot, because First go will be simply to get an understanding of what the literature is saying, so that's likely to be you reading, writing notes. Then as you develop notes, you then break it down into arguments. It might say, well, we're now going to put all of the research that looks at age in this section, so effects of X by age, that might be what it is. It might be by sport, that might be what it is. If you haven't delimited it by sport, you need to have explained why that was in the first case. But you break it down into headings. Remember, well, your job here is to make a case for doing your research, is to make it, here's a really key point, is to make the reading of this really easy for the person who's reading it, so they can follow what you're thinking. Do you like that actor thinking? I hope you did. Yes, acting. You're not, what it isn't, and this is sometimes come, is where, because you can do a database search and it's not a list of research and description of research and putting all the details of research. It is, here's one, this study found this and they found this study found this and they found this study found this and they found this study found this. It's not that. Please don't do that. That's not very interesting. It's not constructing an argument for that. If you wanted to, in essence, list down a whole load of studies that found similar things, you need to start that sentence by saying, a common finding of the research is to use, and then this method, and then as found by this study found this method, this one found something, did something very similar, and so on. So you make a thematic point to bring those things together. You know, if you're probably saying, hold on. Why isn't he just telling us how to do it? Because there are multiple different right ways of how to do it. It's a problem to solve, and you construct an argument to solve that problem. And the literatures will be different for different subject areas. And therefore, how the literature review is put together varies by subject to subject, research question. Very simply, it could be that you're replicating a study that's just been published. The nature of that literature review would focus on the previous research that's just been published. That's actually a very good thing to do, because it delimits the area of your research. You're following their delimitations, and you're testing whether it replicates. You could test whether the same things occur via different methods. So if they used quantitative methods and set up a hypothesis, you could explore whether those effects work using qualitative, and unpack what was the experience of participants going through that, whatever the research was, in order to understand the processes through which the research came out much better. Similar, different, original, justifiable. But the choices you've got to make. But you don't list and describe research. You think about, construct them into themes, into subheadings. Think through when you open a book and you've got no headings at all. It's just one. No. You're not. I can see through the screens you're not happy about that. You're going, oh no, don't do that. Please don't do that. I don't want you to do that. No, we wouldn't do that. I don't do that in my books. No. We break them into headings, break them into sections. You break them into sections, different sections. Tell the reader at the start, within a table of contents, what that looks like, and so that it is really easy for them to follow, to jump to sections, to move around. Tell the reader the order of the section so that they know how to follow it, why it's there, and what you're doing is you're it's building an argument for why this research is needed. Building an argument. Construct your argument. Let the cat out. Ooh, meow. So he goes. Shall I go and get the cat? Right there. Okay. Yeah. He says he's not coming. So you then think about what types of section you're going to have. Common ones are theory. What are the main theories going on around this area? And you put those down, and theories are very important parts of any literature review, because theories are predictive. They guide. They provide explanatory power. It didn't come out very well. Kind of got stuck in the back. But they're very good because they'll say what should happen, and therefore they guide. Theories, one of the best bits about a theory is that they do delimit. They delimit the variables that you're going to look at, and they say how you're going to be looking at them as well. A theory should be tested, and any good theory, and I have developed one, and it came with a set of hypotheses, I should add, comes with a set of hypotheses that are testable and explains how the researchers can test them. So look for theories, look for testable theories that can be, and they are key parts of your literature review. Second key area is, I'll do another bit of that, is the methods. Now the methods are really important. How the methods change can influence the results that are produced, can send whether the theory is tested or supported or not. And me being a dark art with statistics, one of the lessons, or if you like, bits I show people doing research with me is how we can manipulate the statistical test in order to show that a hypothesis works or not. And that sounds like really fishy, but there's a load of subjective decisions that are being made in the selection of tests that you need to be looking at. So how many people were involved? Was it a parametric test or a non-parametric test, and what's the difference for that? Well, a parametric test tends to find significant differences more easily than a non-parametric test. Or did they put a one-tailed hypothesis saying confidence will lead to better performance? They made a good case for that, but what that does statistically is it lobs all of the p-value to one end, which in very simple terms makes it easier to find a significant finding on the data that you've got. So if your significance was p06, which is not significant, it's bigger than 0.05, you have a one-tailed test and that drops to be significant because you've pushed the significance all towards one end. That sounds complicated. It's not complicated, but what you've got to look at is the method, because it doesn't make any. The methods you're going to be using, you absolutely need to understand, and you need to understand how they've been used in the previous research that you've been reading about, on which you're basing your future piece of research. So you can't escape the fact that you don't know about these methods. You need to have a working understanding of how they are used, so that you're not duped. And interestingly, I've been doing some recent work looking at meta-analysis, reform of literature review, and we've been doing a meta-analysis of the meta-analysis, which when you look at a meta-analysis, the author should be reporting what they've done. And one of the limitations that we are picking up is that people don't report what they've done, and therefore it's uncertain. How many studies were in that? What was the risk of bias within that? How did they calculate the statistics to say that the thing worked or not? If you don't put it in there, it's not in the article, you don't know whether it's been applied or not. So they then become key factors that can influence and change the results that you've got, and therefore you need an understanding of how the methods are going to be going. And then the other part to that is the consistency in the previous findings. Has the same result been found repeatedly? What are the contrasting results? Is it more to one side or the other side? These are my hands a bit now, my loves. We don't want to be in our hands properly, BBC, straightforward. And what are the controversies? How are those controversies explained by differences in the method? How are those controversies being explained by differences in theory? You start getting all of that pieced together, and your literature review starts to look rather jazzy. Rather jazzy. So what we'll do is we'll look through an example, and look at the key decisions made in constructing a literature review from an article from a student who's just completed, so one of Wolves' very own. And what you'll see is we were looking at mood responses and mood regulations during COVID among boxers, and why this is entirely really relevant to you, in that this wasn't his main project, but obviously COVID came, lockdown, March the 23rd happened, it was my birthday, the Prime Minister closed the country, said, Andy, have your birthday, and everybody's not quite as bad, but he had to change his project. So he had to change his project. So this is the new project he came up with: online assessment of people using questionnaires, different to what he was going to be doing, and that's what the study will go through. The literature review and some of the key decisions made to illustrate how we constructed this literature review to put an argument for why we were doing this study. And that will help you understand how you go about yours. So the introduction starts off very, very general about the pandemic, about the problems, about the death. The death creates a reason why we want to do some research, and why the special issue on COVID And what you get in one paragraph is the general, this is broadly, right the way down to the specific question. And so that's a really important principle of any literature review of any areas. You start broad and you get more specific as you go down. Start general, end up more specific right at the end. In the end, you've got a very clear idea of where this research. So this paragraph could be headed a specific issue, the general problem to the specific group, the general issues that are going to be had, but what about the specific group who are going to be doing the researching? Why are we delimiting this to boxers? Why delimit? How are you delimiting? Why will boxers be different to the general population? Why? Well, we expect there'll be general negative, but why specifically? And then we have to go on and make. So you've got many issues going on at one time. One is the effect of the environment, coronavirus, but you've got one thing going on, and I'm saying this in really general terms. But then you're going to go, why this? You made a broad case for why this subject group. Now, why these variables? Why specifically these variables? And then in comes, and this is really common again, definitions. You need to define it for the reader, what's going on. How do you define it? Because there's usually multiple definitions, and particularly if you're doing psychology, there's a mess of definitions. And there's always different views on it. So you provide a definition. This is the definition we're going to use. It's one that there's literature support for. Clearly, you can see that one there. Well, it might not be clearly, but if you really look closely, it's not that closely. And it's one of my definitions it's a definition I provided, but you afford that privilege. It's not a privilege. You earn that privilege by doing a theory paper, and you earn the idea that you can test a theory and by doing the research to do so. So it's slightly, but you provide a definition. The definitions delimit your area again. They're really useful to say what you're going to be. And then we're breaking down that research to look to how it's then being studied within COVID. And one of the interesting parts, and again, this is doing a literature review, is that at the start of writing this article, of course, there weren't that many articles that had looked at COVID because it's brand new. But by the time we revised it to have it completed, so you send these articles off for reviewers, a bit like your markers, they come back with comments, you revise and redress them, put them back. There had been a lot of research, so the very literature was changing all the time. You can expect the same in many ways, because the people will be doing new studies. That's not a problem that as much as it's one you then start going, well, actually, how has this literature been changing? And therefore, you write that into your work, so you're aware of ongoing changes that are occurring. That's good. It's good. It's one you accept. It's why you say our literature review is done on these dates. If that's a dissertation, you say it ends on these dates if you need to, or you come back to it. It's an ongoing thing. People expect it to change, but so be conscious of that. Getting into more details, this is quite a lengthy paragraph on the recent research across the area of what we're doing. Again, it's not describing, but updating the reader on what might be expected, making a case for what could find and how we will compare it, providing the relevant literature that will be in our discussion. If you follow in the discussion, we discussed that quite a lot about the mood profiles. Therefore, providing an argument for why we're going to do it. Would it work in this population and this group? Why will those be found? Well, will they? I don't know. But will they? We'll do the research. And so we introduced some of the specifics again of the literature of what we might be finding, and we are again setting this up against theory, saying, well, you will find that, and that will explain some of the previous research, but actually we think that this might be an interesting feature. So we then bring in a topic to make it this test of that model, the test of that depression really influences the nature of mood profiling, is what we do in our results, what we do in our data. It's in our method. I got in the end. It's in our method. So we include that in the literature review because it's making a case for what we're doing in the method and what we present in the results and what we present in the discussion, because it's on the nature of mood. We're saying people get negative in COVID, and they get negative in COVID, and that negativity will be far more pronounced from people experiencing a different mood profile at the start. And that was a test, and that's what you're setting up. So what you get is, as you go through the literature, each paragraph is building on the previous paragraph, is making a case for what we're doing and why we're doing it. It's going through methodological factors for why it might be relevant. It's saying, well, this might be qualitative, the best way of doing it, and this might be quantitative, and explaining that it doing one thing is making a case for you doing this research, and therefore setting up your study. And then at the end of your literature review, you provide a summary of what that's going to be doing and the aims of your study. So in summary of what this work's all about, it's about making a case for the research you're about to be doing. It's about persuading the reader that this is relevant and interesting. It's about defining the key variables. It's about highlighting the controversial topics. It's about guiding the reader so that they know what you're doing and why you're doing it. You delimit so you don't get overwhelmed. And you use theory to help guide your decisions. And you should enjoy it. You should enjoy the process. And it sometimes feels really difficult, but it should feel really difficult because it's challenging. And so what we'll set up from this is a Q&A to go through some of your specific questions. Okay, thank you very much. That's it. They're the key messages. I hope that's been enjoyable. I really hope it's better than watching an episode of EastEnders. Seriously, we've gone through the key things about how to do a literature review. It is about putting a lot of hard work in. It is about reading the work and understanding what's being written, taking notes, being diligent, thinking about what's going on, revising your question. Don't overly make it complicated. If you don't understand some key terms, some key words, you keep searching for those key terms. You understand key tests. You keep driving down search engines to actually find them. I find the simple Wikipedia quite useful. I'm not allowed to say that. I use Google Scholar all of the time to find research. Nothing wrong with that. It's Google Scholar or the university one. It pretty much finds the same thing. The simple one, say Wikipedia for definitions, often I don't trust it as the most reliable source to start with, but I do think that it gives you a starting point to doing the research. And therefore gives you access in. And I think some of the academic articles don't give access in necessarily to finding it. So read, do a project you enjoy, be motivated to collect it, enjoy doing the literature review, and I hope that's quite useful.